Let's welcome in betting expert, also NHL expert, Todd. But did you ever put on the helmet, man? Like, you said you were going to. I don't think you did.
You've been begging for me. You've been begging for me to put on the helmet, and because I am a man of the people, Amanda, I will make sure I put the helmet on one of these segments going forward. Unfortunately, it's in the mothballs right now. So you know what? Maybe we'll do a football preview, and I'll sit in my hockey helmet for you.
Right.
Because I aim to make you happy each and every day we do these segments.
I appreciate it. Let's talk about the draft getting underway tonight. Connor Bedard. Is there any chance that he doesn't go number one overall? Why is this kid so elite? Is he a generational talent?
There's no doubt he's a generational talent, and there is 0.0% chance that he doesn't go number one to Chicago. When you look at what Connor Bedard has done during his time in the Western Hockey League with the Regina Pats, I mean, he's set all sorts of records. And for those folks that don't follow major junior hockey in Canada, there's a designation only bestowed on truly elite talent, and that's called exceptional status. Bedard fits into that bucket, and one of the last players that we saw to be granted that was Connor McDavid, and for Edmonton Oilers fans, we know exactly how that's played out. You look at Bedard, his skating ability, his hockey IQ, his release, he checks every single box that you'd want for a kid his age, and he goes into a situation in Chicago where they're not expected to win now. I mean, we saw in the highlight package earlier that Patrick Kane, what he did the last time the Blackhawks had the first overall pick in the draft. This is a guy that is going to put butts in seats not only in Chicago, but in every stop he makes along the way. And credit the Blackhawks as well. They went out and gave him a little bit of scoring help, acquiring Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno, which amounted to a salary dump for the Boston Bruins earlier this week. Going to be exciting to see how quickly Bedard can adapt to life in the NHL. But the one thing I will say, he's not going to break Teemu Selanne's rookie record for points.
Look, still a lot more optimism in Chicago now than there was even a couple months ago. So there's Bedard number one. After that, a lot of mock drafts are the same, but sometimes they get a little squirrely there. How do you see the top three rounding out?
You know, for me, I think when you look at number two under more traditional stances, Pat Verbeek might have looked to go a little bit off the beaten path and take a player like Matvei Michkov out of Russia who has tantalizing talent, but a lot of questions that have to be answered. So for me, I'm going to take the low-hanging fruit here and say that you can't go wrong with Adam Fantilli, the very talented centerman coming out of Michigan. He joined an elite trio of players to win the Hobey Baker Award, which is essentially the Heisman Trophy for college hockey, as a freshman. Paul Kariya and Jack Eichel of the Golden Knights accomplished that feat before, and I think he's the known commodity. He's played in a high-profile program, and when you look at Fantilli, he's the kind of player that you can build around with a young roster. And when I look at number three, I don't think Columbus is going to go off the beaten path either. They have a chance to select a centerman out of Sweden in Leo Carlsson, who's played with grown men over there. He is tremendous when it comes to puck possession and control. And while I don't think he's going to slot as a top six guy in his rookie campaign, he's a player that they may be able to lean on sooner rather than later, capable of filling in as the Blue Jackets want to compete much sooner than what this rebuild suggests.
You mentioned Michkov out of Russia there. Look, he's an absolute monster, though. But you mentioned some of the question marks around him. He's also not available right away. So where do you think he could land, and maybe what are those question marks?
You highlighted the big question, in terms of what it'll look like with his KHL contract, where he still has a few years left. And look, I'm not going to get into the geopolitical climate here by any stretch of the imagination, but it's been extremely difficult for scouts to get into Russia and watch them with their own eyes. So they haven't gone through the same rigorous interview process that we typically see with prospects. He did an interview through an interpreter earlier this week, and it left a lot of scouts coming away slightly more optimistic than they originally thought. This is a player that no doubt has the potential to not match Connor Bedard in the NHL, but to be a true bona fide superstar going forward. But it does come with a little bit of risk. So when you look at his draft odds here, there's a reason that the over-under is set at 5.5. I would be surprised if we see a team reach for him there. But where it gets interesting is with the 6th overall pick, the Arizona Coyotes. This is a team that's not built to compete in the immediate future. They have a boatload of picks that they can swing and miss even inside the top 10 here, and they can be patient for him to come over. If the Coyotes elect to pass on Michkov, the other logical landing spot becomes the Washington Capitals, because as we know, Alexander Ovechkin ties to his Russian heritage, and if there is one player that you may want to mentor him at the twilight of his career, I think Ovi would be the perfect fit. So look for the Capitals to be another logical landing spot at 8 if the Arizona Coyotes elect to go in a different direction.
Todd, a little bit more news around the Devils today. We've already seen them make some big moves, before the draft, landing Tyler Toffoli. Timo Meier now gets an 8-year contract, according to reports. They're now the betting favorite to win the East. What do you think about these moves, and would they be your pick to win?
You know, this is a team that's going to be extremely talented, Amanda. You look at their top 6 forward group, and it's going to create a lot of problems for a night-in, night-out basis for teams in that Eastern Conference from top to bottom. I mean, we look at some of the young talent in Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier that are coming of age. You add in a player that has playoff pedigree in Tyler Toffoli on what I thought was a pretty reasonable deal, with New Jersey sending Igor Sharangovich along with a draft pick to Calgary in exchange for him. Timo Meier gets that long-term deal, and he was the deadline acquisition that they were so excited about acquiring him from San Jose, and in my opinion, they didn't have to give up a ton. I think the biggest question facing the Devils is what their goaltending situation will be. Look, I'm a lot more optimistic about Akira Schmid and how he projects as a true number 1 starter ahead of Vitek Vanacek, but there still is buzz that the Devils could be in the thick of things to try and acquire Connor Hellebuck if Winnipeg's ask isn't too much. I think this team is extremely talented. I think they're worthy favorites in the Eastern Conference, but at the same time, that's not the same as me advocating to tie up your money for 11 months on this group. If I was looking at one betting market where I wanted to isolate the Devils more so than winning the Stanley Cup, I think their price being second favorites in the Metropolitan Division behind Carolina makes a little bit of sense. With that kind of youth, you know you're going to get a level of intensity on a night-in, night-out basis, and I think they can definitely flirt with that 110-point threshold.
So do you think they can make any more splashier moves, maybe get some of those done before the start of the season?
You know, I'm very curious to see. I mean, look, to their credit, they had a very regimented structure that they've tried to employ in terms of the salary cap. They know Jack Hughes is that face of the organization going forward. I know that was one of the sticking points that they were trying to figure out with Timo Meier. I mean, getting the deal done with Jesper Bratt was big. The one area where I want to see the Devils at least go out and try and fortify things to make them an even stronger roster would be on that blue line. Dougie Hamilton is kind of that leader there, but they did deal Damon Severson to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and there are some questions there to try and identify some of that depth, knowing that goaltending-wise, look, you don't have a guy that's necessarily been there and done that before. Of course, Schmid performed at a high level in that opening round series against the Rangers, but wasn't exactly at his best against the Carolina Hurricanes when he looked a little bit overwhelmed. So if they're able to add some veterans at reasonable deals, this Devils roster gets to be that much stronger on paper, and they may ultimately check every box for Lindy Ruff's bunch.
Todd, when it comes to the Bruins, look, things are a little bit in flux there. No more Taylor Hall. You got a couple of 37-year-old veterans looking at themselves, trying to make a decision on next season. If you had to guess, what does this Bruins roster look like at the beginning of next season?
You mentioned it, a couple of old guys there that, you know, all signs point to them potentially not returning to don the black and gold for the Boston Bruins. That, of course, being David Krejci, who had returned to his home country of Czechia a season ago before he came back and played for the Bruins this year. Patrice Bergeron had talked about retirement going into last season, came back, won the Selke Award again. And when you look at Bergeron, you can slot him in as your top-line center. I mean, his ability to win faceoffs at a ridiculous clip will make him a first-ballot Hall of Famer. But if the Bruins don't have that kind of center depth, it's going to put them in a little bit of a difficult position. So what do? They made the trade that you mentioned by dealing Taylor Hall essentially for replacement parts to the Chicago Blackhawks. They get Nick Foligno off the books as well. And I think the next move that we're waiting to see what happens is what they do in net. Is there a demand for Linus Ullmark? Will they move off of Jeremy Swayman and try and figure out how they can go out there and bring in some fresh pieces? I didn't see that record-setting season coming from the Bruins. I mean, they went into last year as a 20-1 shot to win the Stanley Cup, but obviously disappointing when you go out there and break every single regular season record for wins and points. You build a 3-1 series lead against the Mandagaris' favorite hockey team in the Florida Panthers, and it all comes crashing back to earth when you lose 3 straight. So this is a Bruins team in a little bit of flux, and you can understand why there's not a ton of optimism as far as their odds to win the Cup or even within the division right now amongst odds makers.
I was there for Game 6. It was all me. Bruins fans, you can be mad at me. I will take it. Todd Furman, we appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the day today. Taking a look at NHL upcoming dates. It all begins tonight, round 1 of the NHL Draft.